Beauty from the Shelf is a podcast where industry experts fill in the gaps that are integral to growth for early stage beauty founders and brands. Today's episode talks about incubating beauty brands with a company that does this for a living. I'm joined by Scott Kestenbaum from Maesa. Check out a little bit from our conversation now.
Success comes from the most unexpected places. Even at Maesa, we have found our success in the places that we sometimes least expected it. I mean, who would have thought, the number one selling skincare brand at Sephora today would be Drunk Elephant, which was founded by a Texas mother of four who had no beauty experience. Or there's so many examples like, It Cosmetics, founded by Jamie Lynn Kerna. I pronounced her name wrong, but again, she was like a regional TV news anchor, not from the industry. And you find these stories all the time of, people bringing in new ideas, fresh ideas, and figuring out a way to commercialize them.
Let me tell you a little bit more about Scott. Scott is the Chief Growth Officer at Maesa. Maesa is a beauty incubator that partners with retailers, celebrities, influencers, and manufacturers to shake up the beauty industry. Scott joined Maesa over 20 years ago when the company was founded and thus began his journey in the beauty industry. In his current role, he is focused on developing global sales and new business development. I'm really excited for y'all to hear our conversation from a true mover and shaker in the beauty industry. Let's get into this episode. So, Scott, thanks again for joining us today. I know that Maesa is a company that folks might not necessarily be familiar with because they are likely more familiar with the brands that you all work with. So can you start off by telling us a little bit about Maesa? Who are you and what do you all do?
Yeah, absolutely. I come across that a lot, where people tend to know our brands more than they know us as a company. But we are, at our core, we're a beauty company. But we do have a very interesting business model in the world of beauty. So I think if you ask most people about Maesa, they'll probably tell you they're a beauty incubator, and we are. We are one of the leading independent global beauty brand incubators. And so, what does that mean? We have a strong core competency in identifying market gaps and unmet consumer needs. And so when we seek this out, we find it, we attempt to fill those gaps with new, better, different brands of the future. And so the past 10 years have been a really interesting decade in the world of beauty, both in prestige and in mass, where so much of the growth has not come as historically from these big CPG heritage brands. And most of the growth over the past decade has been driven by this new crop of indie brands and founder brands and celebrity brands and influencer brands. And so that's really where Maesa plays, that we sit very much at the epicenter of that tidal change. So over the past decade, we have created a portfolio of these really amazing, fast-growing disruptor brands. Some of them are Kristen S, which is a hair care brand, Heritage by Mindy McKnight, Being Frenchy, TPH by Taraji, and Flower Beauty, just to name a few.
Thank you. So definitely some brands that have caused some disruption in the market. I know something that buyers definitely love. I can say that myself as someone who was a buyer. I'd love to just hear from you. What is needed to incubate a brand and for it to be successful?
Honestly, I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all recipe for success when it comes to entrepreneurship in beauty. And that's probably one of the things I love most about the beauty industry today is that success comes from the most unexpected places. Even at Maesa, we have found our success in the places that we've sometimes least expected it. I mean, who would have thought the number one selling skincare brand at Sephora today would be Drunk Elephant, which was founded by a Texas mother of four who had no beauty experience. Or there's so many examples like It Cosmetics, founded by Jamie Lynn Kerna. I pronounced her name wrong, but again, she was like a regional TV news anchor, not from the industry. And you find these stories all the time of people bringing in new ideas, fresh ideas, and figuring out a way to commercialize them. And so, what's needed to be successful? There's a few things that we think about at Maesa. So first and foremost, I think the brand needs to have a genuine reason to exist. So over this past decade, as I was explaining, with the rise and prominence of social media, the barriers to entry have fallen dramatically. And this has created an incredibly crowded competitive landscape within beauty, and there's, flush with consumer optionality. So success, I think, starts with a brand that is differentiated from all of the other brands that are out there. We think about this paradigm of new, better, and different. We always talk about that here in Maesa. The brand needs to be new, better, and different from what's currently on the market. It needs to have an authentic story. It has to be able to create an emotional connection with consumers. And that's the starting point, but it's certainly not enough. There's so many examples of ideas, concepts that are great, but they don't reach their true potential. I mean, developing and manufacturing these concepts, turning that concept into a product and a business, it's not easy. It's complex. I mean, operating, especially in our sector, we operate primarily in the masstige segment of beauty. Operating a fast-moving consumer goods business is complex, and it requires a robust organizational infrastructure. So the business needs a strong management team. It needs access to capital. I would say it's one of the allures of a beauty entrepreneur coming to a place like Maesa, coming to an incubator versus building everything from the ground up. So instead of building from scratch, which is certainly one option, and not to say one option is better or worse than the other, we offer this platform where beauty entrepreneurs can plug and play into an existing platform, an existing organization that has existing shared service buckets, existing distribution, and that helps to turn the concept into a business faster. It helps to accelerate speed to market, accelerate growth. It's actually very similar, Monique, to the company that you work for, Emerson, right? Which, it's a different offering, but Emerson also provides a one-stop shop for outsourced logistics and sales services and insights of companies that don't want to build up those buckets from the ground up. So those are some of the things I think about when, what creates success. But I think the thing that we always remind ourselves is you can do all of those things. You can check every one of those boxes, and there's no guarantee for success. Some of it is actually just luck. It's being in the right place at the right time. Maesa's success rate is, I would say, much higher than the industry average, but even we don't get it right every time. As long as we've been doing this for as many brands as we've incubated, we don't get it right every time. And so, along this journey, we've hit some singles, some doubles. We've been fortunate to have multiple home runs, but really, we don't know how to do it right every time. As I mentioned, some of the biggest brands and the greatest successes that we've ever had came from the things that we least expected. And some of our flip side of that coin, some of the greatest failures that we've ever had as a company came from the things we were most optimistic about, our biggest bets. But I think that's the thing as an entrepreneur, is that you can't be afraid to fail. What I love is that we keep getting better at it each time, and we keep learning from the mistakes that we've made in the past.
No, that's so good, Scott. I think as someone who's, just starting this podcast, let's say, so a fairly small thing, if you will, but it's true. In entrepreneurship, you really have to be willing to take risks, know that you might not get things right, and roll with the punches, right? And it's really about how you roll with the punches, how you learn from those failures, how you get up and continue, right? You continue to persist, you move forward and push past those failures to turn them into learnings and then turn them into hopefully more success as you move forward. So on the topic of that art piece of it, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you kind of know, going back to the overall brand, if you've got something disruptive. You talked a little bit about, you having some ideas that you thought were going to be a hit, some things that you were less sure about. But I am curious, since you kind of mentioned the art piece here, is it a gut feeling? Is it just that you're really just like, we're going to try it and we know some things are going to hit and some things are going to miss? Or are there, certain things that you're like, we know we're hitting on a new consumer segment and we know that this is ready? I mean, is there a science to it? Or is it really like, there is just so much of that luck involved that's where it's like, meh, we have a bit of an idea, but not necessarily a formula?
It's certainly the latter. I wish I could tell you that we knew every time, but the reality is it really does surprise us. I mean, whether the brand does this or it does this or it does this, it's really hard to predict. I mean, we try to predict it. We have, sometimes we study, we panel, and we do things to try to take a little bit of the guessing out of the game. But really, we don't always know. And so our strategy today in terms of new brand incubation is certainly fewer, bigger, better, right? So what we're not doing is we're not here just to throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and see what sticks. We're trying to be thoughtful, focused, deliberate about what we bring to market. Use that criteria that I mentioned before about making sure that what we bring has a true reason to exist on the shelf and it's differentiated. And, to get to that point, it takes a long time. And as you can imagine, to get to that one exceptional idea that's worthy of taking the bet and investing in a big way, we have to have that discipline to assess and vet and say no to hundreds of mediocre ideas, right? And so it is not a light process, and we take it very seriously. And, when we have the desire to bring something new, we go all in and we put everything we have behind it.
So you talked a little bit about how Maesa already has certain things in place so that brands or ideas that founders might have, if you're going for a celebrity or maybe if you have an idea around a formulation, that you all can kind of bring folks in because you have this incubator, right? You have resources that are already there. Mm-hmm. And so I think that those resources, you alluded in the last question, that it can really help you scale quickly. And I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about why scale is important or why it matters. Yeah,
sure. I think the answer, like most, is it depends. I don't think the right go-to-market is always to go too fast, too quickly. Sometimes moving slower is better. But I would say that where we play, and I mentioned, that we play primarily in this food, drug, and mass market segment of the industry. And when you're playing where we play, servicing the likes of Target and Walmart and so forth and so on, needless to say, price value is an incredibly important part of that business. And so to compete in that market, we have to bring incredibly innovative products, and they're price sensitive. A lot of them are $10 or less. And so the only way to create an amazing needle moving product that's $10 retail or less, you do need scale to be able to do that. You need to have sufficient distribution. You need to have a certain level of demand out of the gate. You have to have certain economies of scale to get to that right cost of good to keep the business profitable. There's a reason why, even still today, if you walk into a Walmart, the overwhelming majority of beauty shelf space is owned by 4 companies. Big retailers are expensive to do business with. Servicing the likes of those retailers requires deep expertise, but it also requires deep pockets. And so the cost to serve these retailers is intense. And so it's something I would say, if you are up for the challenge as an entrepreneur, to try out of the gate to work. In some ways, it's easier to do it at scale than it is to do it dipping your toe into the pot.
Thanks for that. I know whenever I talk to founders, one of the biggest challenges is typically around this topic of price. And how do I get the right price? And, they're saying, well, I don't know how this brand is able to offer this product at this cost. And the retailer wants what margins? And I tell them, I'm like, this is not a game for folks who don't have money.
Yes.
Or for folks who don't necessarily have the network so that you can reduce those costs and really maximize what you're getting. And to your point, I think I read an article, I think it was about a month ago, that was saying that 80% of the shelf space is owned by the same 10 companies.
Yeah.
So to your point, it's a very true fact. And a lot of that is just because the system was kind of built that way. But it doesn't mean that the new brand shouldn't come in and try to disrupt things. But it definitely just lets them know, to your point earlier, how competitive things are and how challenging it really is.
No, and for me, credit where credit's due. Again, if you look at it today versus 10 years ago, I feel like we're moving in the right direction. And a lot of credit to the likes of Walmarts and Targets that have been a lot more welcoming toward independent brands and young companies today than they have been in the past. But it's not for the faint of heart. The upsides are high in mass market retail, but the risks and the downsides are also quite sizable as well. So you have to have the awareness of both.
Be ready for anything. Be ready for anything. So I'd love to understand, As a serial, I'm calling Maesa a serial brand incubator. How do you plan and build innovation into your product pipeline? So it's one thing to come out with a new brand and to say, we're going to launch this new brand, we're going to target this consumer and all of that. How do you then build a new product pipeline? Because I know that beauty is one of those areas where new products are somewhat expected, depending on what retailer you're working with. So would love to hear how you look at that and how you think about doing new things.
Yeah, so we have a full separate arm of Maesa that just that. So we have a group within Maesa, we call it our Blue Sky team, and it's just that. It's an in-house dedicated team. It's the incubation arm of Maesa. Every single brand that's within our brand portfolio today was born out of the Blue Sky team. And so this is a group that's fully responsible for exactly what you just said is, what is the newness going to be, whether it comes in the form of a SKU or a product or a brand, everything comes out of that Blue Sky team for us. There is a process, but it is an organic process. So that Blue Sky team is a group of women that, study what's happening. They have their finger on the pulse of what's trending in the world of beauty. They immerse themselves with consumer insights. They're constantly seeking out new innovation, new patents, new invention, new ingredients, but the reality is probably equal parts art and science. We are, I would say, a data guided organization, not a data driven organization. Again, we subscribe to the same data that everybody else has. So why does everybody look at the same data but come up with different ideas? That's the art form of it. And so some of it is, we know that, to maintain our shelf space, we have to have productive products that play to the core. And some of it has to be more revolutionary than evolutionary. I mean, how do we disrupt that? How do we come up with those ideas? I mean, sometimes when everybody else is running left, we run right. We go against the grain of conventional thinking. We challenge the norm. We reimagine what's possible in beauty. And so that becomes challenging for a company like Maesa. We've grown a lot, and with scale comes, you have to have more process to scale. And we are even now trying to figure out how to delicately balance growing and maturing as an organization, but maintaining that entrepreneurial spirit, which is the thing that got us here in the first place, and just not being afraid to try new things.
Thanks for that. So moving on to talk about the retail partners, because I know that they are oftentimes a key part to a brand's success, right? Can you talk a little bit about what elements have been present in some of the retail partnerships to allow you to have some success? I mean, some of the brands you mentioned earlier, like Kristen S. or Heritage by Mindy, they are doing really, really well at those retailers. So would love to hear just what those conversations might sound like or what you do to ensure there's success there on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, very humbly, I would start by saying that Maesa simply couldn't do what we do without the incredible support and partnership of our retail. I mean, our typical go-to-market strategy differs from the way many beauty companies are born and launch. What we don't do the soft launch. We don't start direct to consumer. The way we go to market, for better or for worse, is we jump in the deep end day one. We go for the A launch with the A retailer. And, the only way that works, the only way it's possible is to really have that retailer by your side, to have a retailer who, believes in your vision, wants to come along on the journey with us. And look, when it's done right, it's magical and it's a total win-win. So the retailers we work with, in today's age where it's the everything marketplace and, every single brand, every product is at your fingertips at the world 24/7. And, one of the ways these retailers have to grow market share is to create these proprietary and exclusive brands that, can't be bought on Amazon or at any of your competitors. And so we believe very strongly in this model of incubation through long-term retail partnerships. And so, like I said, when it's done right, it's a very powerful thing, not just for us, but for our retailer partners as well. When it works really well, the retail partner is helping to level the playing field for an exclusive brand. Our brands get some level of preferential terms and support from the retailer in exchange for that loyalty. And what do they get? They get a brand that ideally is driving incremental traffic, share of voice, and market share. And so when you look at our portfolio today, without a doubt, like you mentioned, Kristen S. and Heritage and amongst others, the most successful brands that we've had, they're not just from our own efforts. They are absolutely from the co-creation efforts of the retail partner that we went with. And so, when we're able to do that, when we're able to, not sit on opposite sides of the table of the retailer and sit on the same times and get in the kitchen together and build that brand together and create products together. I mean, that is really the unlock. That's when all that magic happens. And so that's what we try to do every time.
And I can imagine that the retailers are coming to the table with you all because they know that you have a certain level of infrastructure and systems set in place. And that gives them some hope or some trust, if you will, that, hey, we're partnering here and this is going to be something new, but it's not necessarily something that is new to you, if that makes sense, right? You're not learning all the things for the first time. And that's a good one.
I think that's part of it. But look, it wasn't that long ago where it was our first time. And so I know firsthand, and I can empathize at the highest level with any company that is doing it for the first time. It's hard. It really is. And, even when it's not us, like we always try to pay it forward and try to help those. Because again, like I do believe rising tide lifts all ships. And, the more prevalent indie brands come, whether they happen to be with Maesa or anywhere else, the better it is for everyone. And so I think the combination of having, been here for 20 years, having strong financial backing, having an organization, I think there's, close to 500 people that work at Maesa now. That certainly gives a certain level of stability that helps to mitigate risk when you want to do something big. We're in a nice stage in our life cycle right now where we're sizable enough to take on those types of programs that could both move the needle on our side and move the needle on the retailer side.
That's awesome. So I'd love in talking about those early stage brands or the other indie brands that are out there. Many are strapped for cash, and it can be tough to find just resources or things that can really help these brands grow. So one of the questions that I always try to ask is, what tips would you offer an early stage brand that is looking to grow that are low cost or no cost? So any tips that you have, please share so that we can, let the people know.
I don't know if being strapped for cash is just a startup problem. I think to this day, I still feel strapped for cash, but I think that's the case. I think as long as you're a fast growing organization and constantly reinventing yourself and, the cash issues don't necessarily go away post startup phase, but
that's not what I wanted to hear, but it's honest. I appreciate it.
I'll be honest, but but no, I think, look, in some ways, this is actually the best time in the history of beauty to scale consumer brands, scale beauty brands at a relatively low cost. I mean, I started in this industry 20 years ago. 20 years ago, if you wanted to start a brand, if you wanted to speak to consumers, you didn't have a lot of choice. You had to advertise through very expensive traditional media, through an intermediary. So it had to go through TV, radio, magazine. And obviously all of that was flipped on its head when social media became mainstream, starting 10-ish years ago. And suddenly now brands and brand founders, they had this megaphone whereby they could speak directly to their followers, to their community. Now today, I think the paradigm is shifting again. So now TikTok has very quickly emerged as, I'd say, probably the most relevant destination for beauty discovery. Certainly for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, but quickly for all ages, it seems like. And TikTok is really it's an incredible thing. It's really become, I would say, like the ultimate democratizer of beauty. Because again, in the era of Instagram, everything was about, how many followers you have and your celebrity really mattered. And I'm not going to say those things don't matter anymore, but they matter a little bit less on this new platform. Because here, whether you have 10 followers or 10 million followers, it matters less than the quality and the stickiness of the content that you produce, right? So with TikTok, its content is king. It's just, if I were a young brand, if I were starting out, if I was cash constrained, I would probably focus my efforts on building brand awareness through that platform. I would say probably the other tip I would give is outsource when it makes sense, meaning, successful entrepreneurs They know what they're good at, but more importantly, they know what they're not good at, and they surround themselves with people who are. And so don't try to do everything yourself out of the gate. If your superpower is marketing, don't go out there and try to, hire a large staff and create a supply chain and logistics day one, right? I mean, find a competent, reliable outsourcing partner. Look, that's a nice little plug for Emerson. But yeah, I would say don't try to conquer the world all by yourself day one. Like, find partners that can help you in the areas that you need help.
That is great advice. Great advice. Well, look, those are all of the questions that I had for today. Want to just say thank you again. This was really, really great. I wrote down a couple of notes that I thought were really awesome. I love your thoughts on new brands and just saying, how can you really make sure that you're bringing something that is going to be really new or better or different? I think that's what you said. How can you look at that differently? And I also love you saying that TikTok is the ultimate democratizer. I don't think I've heard that before, but I do think that is very true because discovery has been flipped upside down with TikTok. And it's really allowing folks that had really small microphones to really amplify their voices in ways that it was much harder on some of the other social media platforms. So it was really great advice.
It's incredible to see it work. Yeah.
Thank you again to Scott for joining me on the podcast this episode. I absolutely loved our conversation, and I love Maesa's spirit to bring new and differentiated brands to the beauty industry. I think there's a lot that we can learn from this idea of trying new things and knowing that you're going to have some things that stick and some things that won't. I hope that it's encouraging to founders and other brands that are listening to this episode today, as this challenges you to know no one gets it right 100% of the time. However, you want to learn from those mistakes and learn from those failures and see how you can continue to keep going to continue to bring newness and innovation to the beauty industry. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review, share this with a friend or colleague, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.